everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Reading Party podcast with Megan and Lexi. This episode continues our season looking at modern retellings of the Iliad and the Odyssey, ancient epics known for both brutal violence and instances of sexual assault. This episode is not suitable for under 18s. We hope you have your favourite beverage and snack ready to go, because we've got our teas and are ready to start spilling the tea on our latest ancient story.
Most important question of the day. What are you drinking?
Actually, I don't have anything yet, but Josh is going to bring me some tea. I suspect breakfast tea, but I'm not 100% sure. Sometimes he surprises me. But I said, I'm going to go make tea and then start recording. And he said, oh no, I'll bring you tea. Thank you. I will.
That is brilliant.
I will take that. I mean, really, what
someone
more
to
do
bring
you
me
need in a partner but someone who will bring you tea?
That
I mean, a lot
is
more if we're being realistic, but you know.
Well, if we're being shallow, that is the true definition of love. Honey, I will bring you tea. Not coffee, tea.
Yes, tea. It is the best.
It is the best. And I mean, I've been getting my fill of delicious, like authentic British tea.
Oh, beautiful. What are you drinking today?
This is a very special Earl Grey. I don't know why it's like super special other than it is like I forgot exactly what they said it was, but they said it was a British brand, a local British brand. So I was like, I can't remember. But yeah, that's why it's special. Because otherwise I'm like, but it's Earl Grey. But yeah, so yeah, it's a local Earl Grey. I'm super, super excited about it, which is also impressive because apparently I'm living in a part of the UK where they have a lot of like local breweries, so this would be where you would want to get beer, not tea. But yeah, I was like, well,
tea is far superior. I mean
it's tea,
just the way it is.
Exactly. You know, you have a whole break in the day here reserved for just tea. So I'm very, very happy with my tea. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm ready to really spill this tea on the second half of Silence of the Girls, if you are.
I am absolutely ready. Absolutely.
Excellent. Beautiful. Okay, so it's been, well, by the time people listen to this, it's gonna be 1 week. But for us, it's been a couple weeks since our last recording. So do you wanna maybe do like a quick lightning catch the audience up on what's been going on, or what do we want to just go right into it?
I think just go right into it because it'll be fresher in their minds than it will for us.
Okay, great. I hope that doesn't show too much. Yeah, okay, so I'm happy to start us off because I noticed one major inaccuracy that I didn't think or notice when we did the first half, which was the prevalence of the Greek military field hospital that is there. I realized that's super inaccurate because that's a Roman invention. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I forget about it because it's so sanitized. We see it in so many
every
different,
historical drama.
Exactly. So you just kind of like come to expect it. But then I was sitting down and really just thinking about Briseis' place and how she kind of helps out and she does this, that, and the other thing. And we've seen it in a couple other adaptations, I think, or made reference to it. And yeah, it was something, maybe it was a conversation I had with someone for my other podcast.
It's in Song of Achilles as well, isn't it? Because Patroclus helps out in the medical tent.
Exactly. So I was like, no, this is actually included in a lot of other things. But I think we miss it because we're just so used to this idea that, okay, it would make sense that they would have like a tent for sick people. But yeah, so no, I was talking with some Romanists the other day. So I think that's maybe what jogged my memory. But I came back to it and I was like, they didn't have this. Why is this here? So that was super interesting. So that was one stray observation, and then the second sort of stray observation, that's not really relevant to the plot, but it was just still an observation. Did you, as a Brit, notice there are a lot of like British isms in this
I
that
did. I
Americans
did.
would,
And
yeah.
later, or towards the end of the second half, there's a section where Briseis is remembering talking or hearing women talk about their sons. And like it's written, the dialect is very British. Very British. It was wonderful. I loved it.
Yeah, I thought it was so funny. Well, I think I didn't really notice until I went sort of back through and noticed that interestingly, when she was describing breasts, she called them knockers or wrinkled dugs. And I was like, that's not an American thing. I would never hear someone call them that. And I was like, oh damn, this is like super British, actually. Like I hope the reader has a vague familiarity with British words because this would be quite confusing, I think. I mean, you could look it up, I suppose, but I just feel like, I'm like, okay, that was unexpected. Um, so yeah, those are just my two sort of stray passing thoughts, which is one, it's super British, and two, yeah, they just slipped in something that didn't exist for, thousands of years. That's fine.
I
Um,
did like the place of the Fields Hospital though. It was um for Briseis, it was clearly a very welcome respite from everything else that she was dealing with, and I liked it as a staging ground for some of the things that happened. And at one point, Achilles sends Patroclus down to check on someone, and there's a little scene of Patroclus kind of grinding herbs and helping his friend, and it was nice. It was kind of a humanizing moment. But yeah, and I don't know how that would have. I mean, like they could have played it out in a private tent, I guess. But it was I enjoyed it. It was nice. But yes, anachronistic.
but it works for the plot, so I kind of, at that point, I was like, well, this is not a historical, like completely 100%, work of scholarly literature. So I was like, okay, whatever, I'll let it go. I mean, just use your imagination. I just thought it was funny. But okay, so what immediately stood out to you in the second half that was like particularly interesting or different or just kind of, I mean, the whole novel really is just sort of a biting, gritty read. So
It is. I think we made this comparison last time. It's Troy Fall of a City in novel form, and it, as you'd expect with a novel, it very much continues in that vein for the second half. It's unapologetically tragic, and I feel that you get, because of the way the story is told, it kind of alternates from Briseis' first person narrative to third person focusing on Achilles. And I think because of that juxtaposition of the two views, you really get the sheer tragedy of Briseis' position and the helplessness. And it's said a couple of times in the narrative that, or she says a couple of times, I don't have a place in this aside from what is created for me by by men. And Patroclus tells her at one point, I can't remember how he phrases it, but he essentially says, you change it, like you can change it, you just get to the point where you have to do something different. And she says, it's such a male viewpoint. You have the power to change it. And even Patroclus has limited power, but he does have power. And Briseis has absolutely no way of influencing or changing her position. So you've got kind of that tragedy and helplessness from Briseis, and then it will switch to Achilles. And it's a different kind of tragedy, especially in the second half, because you get the death of Patroclus and Achilles. I mean, we all know how that one goes. He is just grief-stricken. So you have the kind of parallel tragedy, but you also have, especially just before Patroclus dies, when Achilles is doing his sulking thing, you kind of get this, you get really Achilles' arrogance in full force. And it's something that is touched on in the other adaptations and explored in the other adaptations, but I feel like this is the most thorough treatment of it that we see. Maybe Song of Achilles comes a close second, but I feel like because of the viewpoints, because we don't have the story of Achilles being told through Patroclus' kind of rose-tinted glasses, you see more just of the raw arrogance and barbaric nature of Achilles. That it was very interesting, and yeah, excellent contrast to Briseis, and it really highlighted the, like, it's just sad. It's so sad. Beautifully written, but oh my god, so sad.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I do want to say I was quite taken aback though, because yeah, we said, it's Fall of a City in book form. It's very gritty. They, like, in certain places she goes into like very graphic detail, which makes one very, very uncomfortable. Like that one, well, when Briseis is still with Agamemnon, and then there's that horrible scene where he basically like spits into her mouth, and there's that visceral just reaction of like, I want to recoil, and I'm just sitting here reading this. But to sort of have, well, it's weird because I was just like, there's this sort of balance I know she's trying to go for, but also it's one of the only things that I don't know how I really feel, and it kind of affects the whole experience, because it's like, on the one hand, she leans really heavily into it to the point where it becomes sort of this, I didn't really know what to call it, but I guess
it's very unrelenting. There are very few bright spots. It's just sad.
I think the closest term that I could come was torture porn.
Ha! Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Like, that's the closest I could get. So it leans into this like torture porn thing, which really was kind of a turn off in certain places. But then I did not like how certain other depictions, like, if you're going to lean into it and have it be like a torture porny thing, that's a choice and that's fine. But I think you need to lean completely into that, because what she did, I find, is some depictions of brutality and rape were sort of sanitized, quote unquote. Because like when she's sort of having Briseis describe Achilles and Agamemnon's treatment of her, on the one hand, you have, oh, well, Achilles was, not as cruel, and she kind of wasn't expecting, it was very unexpected. And, well, I think she's quoted as being like, well, it was over quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have her talking about like Agamemnon, and then she was like, well, it wasn't so terrible because it wasn't anything I, wasn't expecting. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, that's kind of an interesting way to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I felt it was a bit sanitized, and I thought it was a bit awkward then to have like half of it be like torture porn and half of it to be like a very sanitized, it's a, well, we know exactly what this brutal, horrible rape thing is, and this, that, and the other thing. So yeah, another Tuesday. Mm-hmm. So I was just like, that's an odd treatment of it. So I didn't really kind of appreciate that.
Do you not think that maybe by the time she gets to Agamemnon, Briseis is just so emotionally numb because of everything that's happened?
It could be.
But
now
it didn't
I
come
didn't
across that way for you.
But it didn't really, because like another thing that I didn't really understand was like, by the time that she's captured and clearly a slave in the Greek camp, I mean, here she is, very disapproving of all the women who kind of attach themselves to a Greek and have these sort of weird sort of, second marriages and whatever to survive. And she's like sort of scornful of that. And she makes a big deal about how she just, like she understands why, but she's also disapproving. But then it's like she talks about how it's terrible. And then, but I kept in mind the whole time that like when she was married, even before she got here, her husband would go out and freaking like rape people and make them slaves. And she like had no problem with that, or she just didn't say anything and she didn't make a fuss. So then it strikes me as a very kind of, well, if it doesn't affect you, then it doesn't really matter, then it's fine. But then when it is you, it's bad. But like, depending on to me just came off a bit as like,
A little hypocritical.
yeah, and very just, I
Mm-hmm.
if you're gonna go with something, make it like a constant thing that you sort of reiterate. But she was so wishy-washy with it that that was that ruined it a bit. Now, I'm not gonna say it was big enough that it ruined my entire appreciation for the work as a whole, because I did actually enjoy reading it. But there were just some sort of hypocritical things that I was kind of like, okay, this is, like, maybe just pick something and stick with it. Um, but I guess that kind of goes with my larger sort of questioning theme throughout the work also, which was, I don't really know how I feel about Briseis as sort of her protagonist either. It was an interesting choice.
Mm-hmm.
I liked how someone attempted to tell it through her eyes and not Patroclus or another man.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but again, with this wishy-washiness of how her point of view is written, which then kind of just calls into question how she, as a character, is written, was that I found she was a little bland at certain places. Like it was very hard for me to relate to her.
Mm-hmm.
Not only because I wasn't in her situation, but also because I don't know if you felt this, and please elaborate if you did or didn't, but like I felt like a lot of the time in the novel, she felt a little separated from the other women. Like,
Yeah. No, she I think she sets herself aside very early on. Like she talks about like being with the other women and talking with them and sharing things with them, but you're right, she's very critical of a lot of them. And the narrative really doesn't focus at all on her relationship, because there are a couple of women that she's close to. But after the first, like the opening chapter or two chapters, it really doesn't look at her relationship with the other women in the camp. It focuses so much, almost to the exclusion of everything else, on her relationship with the men. So she is completely separated, and the brief times that she is with the other women and like physically with them, like in the weaving sheds, and when she's Agamemnon takes her and she's like sleeping in the weaving sheds, and you don't get a lot of description or dialogue of her with the women or talking with the women. It's always she's thinking about the men, and she's walking on the beach by herself thinking about the men. And it's a very different novel in that sense from something like 1,000 Ships, which very much focuses on not only the women, but more on their relationship in a lot of the chapters to the other women. So especially when you're looking at the women of Troy, a lot of what you're looking at in 1,000 Ships is how they interact together. Obviously, there are a lot of chapters which focus more on like the women and thinking of their husbands and their captors and all that kind of thing, but you have more interactions between women, and I felt like that was very much absent in Silence of the Girls, which is funny. It's amusing given the title, because really what you have is one woman telling her story. Absolutely fine, because that's obviously the plot. One woman telling her story, but only in relationship to the men who are responsible for her situation. And yeah, I don't think this would pass the Bechdel test, actually. It'd be interesting to reread it and kind of note down all the times that women are talking to each other about something that isn't a man. Which, I don't know, I don't want to be too critical, because the story is like the Iliad is so male centric, and all of the main plot points are driven by men. So having an adaptation of that story that is not in itself male centric, even with a female protagonist, I think is probably very, very difficult to do.
Yeah, so to wrap sort of that point up, it definitely felt like Briseis kind of put herself aside, and it was like well, I'm special, I'm here, and I'm not like everyone else. And I don't know if that was because it was she who was Achilles' prize, and because he was the best, it automatically like gave her that special thing. But yeah, no, so she was very separate. But I did find it quite interesting how, yeah, in a novel that's supposed to be super feminist and kind of like exploring women's trauma and the bonds of female like sisterhood within an awful situation. It was surprisingly light on the actual bonds of sisterhood, you know? Um, but it was interesting how like it was light on it until sort of the end when you have the horrific um sort of uh, sequence, right, with Polyxena and Hecuba in the tent. Um and when she's asked, will you accompany me? Will you come and sort of see her to her slaughter because I can't do it alone? Then it just sort of like full on brings on the let's be sisters together, like the sisterhood of like we need to support each other, and how also like at the end she's then helping with Astyanax, like his body, and she makes sure that they're buried properly, and I just found it really interesting how they had her do all that at the end.
Right, but there's not an awful
do
lot leading up to kind of...
Yeah, so I'm kind of like, why would you go out of your way to do this at the end? I mean, maybe it was a strategic choice of being like, maybe becoming pregnant gave her like this whole new lease on whatever. But she didn't even like, I don't know. How did you feel that like, I don't know, the characterization of her after she was pregnant? Did you think that was like weird or just kind of like...
No, honestly, it kind of felt a little bit like the pregnancy was an afterthought. And it's like, especially given that it's mentioned so early on that she's been barren and that it's been such a trial for her, especially with her mother-in-law. I was expecting a little bit more of a reaction from her. And especially given that the child is Achilles' child and her like very complicated, generally negative feelings towards him. Yeah, it was interesting. Again, looking back to Thousand Ships, I feel like Natalie Hayes did maybe not necessarily a better job, but a much fuller job with Andromache and her feelings around bearing Greek sons and Greek children. Yeah, I wasn't expecting her to become pregnant, and I don't know, it didn't... It just felt a little bit like an afterthought. What did you think?
It did feel like an afterthought, but also, I mean, it would make sense that if she's been used, basically, I mean, okay. Also, I had to keep in mind, I had to look up when it was written, and it was 2018, so it was clearly made after Me Too, right? So I feel like there's the before Me Too, and then there's everything made after in the shadow of it. So this was clearly made after. But I thought it was interesting how in a time where in a piece that's marketed as you really want to get the brutality. I mean, you have sort of the torture porn on the one side, so then you have the brutality of this. So I feel like if she's trying to play this role of really giving voice to the horrible atrocity and all the horrible things that happen to women in war, I mean, and she's dealing with really still contemporary themes, right? Which is like, I mean, we don't see it as this way because of just studying the ancient world, and women are taken and become slaves, and then oftentimes they're, coupling up with their captors, and then they're having Greek babies and stuff. But the theme under it though is basically it's basically a woman forced to carry and birth her rapist child, right? And that's like a super taboo, not taboo, but like it's a big topic now, right? And so to sort of put these women in that situation, and essentially if you're trying to capture this horrible shit that's happening to Briseis and all the other women, I don't understand why she wouldn't lean further into it is Achilles' child, because yes, it's blah, blah, blah in the context of the story, but also it's just the theme itself of she is having her rapist child who she didn't love, blah, blah, blah. She has this very complicated relationship with him. And to not have her react more to
they're just
that.
Positive or negative, there seemed to be very little reaction as far as Briseis was concerned. I almost missed it. I very nearly missed the fact that she was pregnant, because it just kind of was briefly there, and then it's kind of mentioned throughout the last 2-3 chapters, but it's not.
Yeah.
She doesn't personally have any, at least that I noticed, emotional response to it. It's just I am pregnant. The end. Okay. Is this a good thing? You've never had a child before. You've had issues before because your mother-in-law was mean because you couldn't have babies. Is it a good thing because you've always wanted one? I mean, that's not really talked about in the rest of the novel, so I can understand them not. I can understand Pat Baker not going that way. Or is this a tragedy and you don't know how you're going to reconcile this child who is itself innocent, but is also the child of the man who slaughtered your entire family and then raped you repeatedly? I don't know. I feel like there could have been something there.
I think for guidance, I kind of look to when she finally tells Achilles and just goes, "Oh, by the way, and I'm pregnant," you know. But also then you see in how it's written afterwards, even after she tells him, well, it's a really rushed reaction. He doesn't really, he just says, "Oh, okay, well, I won't be here. So, cool." And then he like marries her off real quick. And it's interesting how a lot of the fights that usually are highlighted, they're little more than background noise, right? When Hector dies, background noise. It was only once Hector's body was brought back. When Achilles dies, he kind of just dies off page, right? You just have her be like, "Oh yes, and there was a whale that went up and he was dead," and you're like, "Oh, okay."
I quite liked that because it kept the focus on the camp, and on the women. I did like that there wasn't a lot of like detail about the battles necessarily.
I mean, it would have made sense for this adaptation, I think. So yeah, I didn't mind. I just thought it was interesting. I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. Just he died." Although I do want to just rewind us to before he dies. So this is maybe the first adaptation of the like 6, 7, 8 we've done in this season now that's really made me change my mind about a major character.
Ooh.
And I was
Which one?
shocked. Priam.
Oh.
Because I think every adaptation that we've gone through so far and that I've noticed, how did I feel about him when we saw, and it was interesting because I was just thinking back on from what I can remember, my reaction to how we covered Priam in some of these other adaptations of, you have the harrowing, he comes unarmed and he sneaks into the camp and then he begs Achilles because of his whole, "I'm a devoted father and I just would like to bury my son." And in most of the iterations we've seen him in, that's all he's written and the scene is about, which is the love of duty and how he's such a devoted man, and he just really wants his son back. And so what we got, though, I mean, when we first see his first interaction, Pat Barker's basically borrowing straight from the source material, right? Where she even puts in the Homeric line of, I'm doing what no man has done before. I kissed the hands of the man who killed my son. Well, one, Briseis being there, which they don't always mention, and sometimes in certain adaptations she's not there. No one else is in the tent. So I thought the parallel was really interesting, that as soon as he says that, she basically just retorts, right, with a very clever, "And I've been forced to do what every woman before me has had to do, spread my legs for
the man who killed my brothers."
Yeah, exactly. So I did enjoy her clever retort because that's like the kind of sassy reply I probably would have been like, "Yes, girl." But yeah, I was most jarring after. So when Briseis insists on taking care of her or of him, and then basically when she's talking to him, when Achilles is like off asleep or whatever, and she's all, "Please let me come with you. Like, I'd like to go." And yeah, this is the section that really made me change my entire opinion about Priam, because his response is this like really horrible, despondent, like,
"No."
"Yeah, I see what you mean, but no," because Yeah, I mean, he admits he knows they're gonna lose the war, and then two, he just kind of acts like, well, I'm gonna die quickly, and I don't really care what happens to all the women, but I know that you're all gonna be sold off as slaves, but I couldn't be bothered to help you, like, make a break for freedom so that way I can give you the choice to, like, kill yourself, run away, or not be taken
Yeah.
captive, or do something noble. I mean, it's just this very blatant, I don't care, sorry, even though I
Not
know
my
you.
problem.
Right? And so then that made me think of like, well, how can you have this man who's supposed to be this devoted, I care about my city and my citizens and all of my country. And then I'm like, no, you're not. Because, well, if you really cared about your country, you'd kick Paris and Helen out and be like, nah, take them
Bye.
because I love my country too much to go into war. And then, so I'm kind of like, oh, this was really interesting. So for the first time, I'm not seeing him as just this devoted father. I mean, like it made me question everything. Like, well, are you doing this because I mean, I'm sure he loved his son, but I was also like, are you doing it just out of this pure love of your son? Or is it kind of like you also need to bury him and do what's right because either his mother told you something or you're just terribly afraid that when the war is over and you are killed, if you've not honored and buried your son, are you just afraid that, you're going to have some horrible fate in the underworld? So is it like a duty and not
Yeah.
just pure love?
Yeah.
So that made me really see Prime in a completely different light, um, which was unexpected.
Yeah.
And
That bit surprised me too.
and unexpectedly, it also, when I was reading this, I literally had instant flashbacks to the relationship and the same scenes that we saw in the movie Troy, because there he is. He recognizes her, right? She comes running out and she says, she looks at him and she goes, and he goes, Briseis, my girl, and like hugs her and is like, come, my girl. And then, Achilles lets her go and she runs, like she goes with Priam. And I mean, it's just a very different dynamic. But also, the fact is that in the back of my mind, also, he lets her go because they were in love. I don't think, or I don't appreciate that as much, because essentially I was like, but to I just felt like to have, I don't know. I guess it it like erases Briseis' experience as a war captive if, like, depending on the adaptation, I suppose, but you have like the lives of women clearly in captivity, but then not only are they ignored, but then the storytellers themselves choose to ignore their pain and their plight. But then if you do have an adaptation like the movie, where then you make Achilles fall in love with Briseis, I'm like, yeah, but to have them just sort of fall, and they fall in love, it like, to me, it sort of erases her experience and makes it harder to see the differences in adaptations. Um, so I don't know why it was such a strong scene, but like I could not get through listening to this scene. Also, again, audiobooks, I'm listening to it, not reading the pages, but in having it read to me, I couldn't escape the parallels. For I was hearing it read, but then I was thinking of the Troy and thinking of the difference and how the storytellers treated the exact same scene, the exact same material, the exact same relationships. And it was so interesting to see how, yeah, like Pat Barker isn't shying away kind of from this experience, and they're not in love and she doesn't like him and all this stuff. But then, you have the movie come in and be like, oh no, and they were in love, and it doesn't matter that she's a prisoner of war. Nope, they just see each other, have that zing, and then their clothes fall off. Like, it's just weird. And I don't know if it's something about the way that Pat Barker's writing evokes a lot of parallels, or if it's just my brain going crazy. But like, I felt like more than anything, reading this specific adaptation made me see so many parallels with the other works in a way that the other works didn't necessarily bring all these parallels rushing back. It might be one or two, but I had so many in this one. What did you feel about that scene, that whole thing?
Yeah, I definitely see what you mean. It wasn't terribly fresh in my mind. I think maybe because I'm slightly less familiar with the movie than you are. I've only seen it like once or twice. Um, but it was incredibly different. And I feel like the way that Priam was treated by Pat Barker, not only his refusal to take Briseis with him, but there's also this undercurrent of rage that is described, I think, very well in Priam when he goes to retrieve Hector's body. In other episodes, in other adaptations, he's like dignified or pathetic or sad, but there's not an awful lot in the way of anger towards this man who slaughtered his son and then desecrated his body. And this collection of scenes really, it's, for me, did two things. Like in the book, it weirdly humanized Achilles in a way that I didn't think was possible given how awful he has been throughout the rest of it. So after Patroclus has died, he, like we said, kind of goes off on a bit of a bender, to borrow some British slang, and there's something fundamentally broken in him, and Priam's arrival kind of starts bringing him back to himself, and you see him empathizing with someone and treating someone well rather than letting his rage take over. So it did that, but it also, for Priam, I think, yes, you have this dignified old man asking for his son, but you also have this, like, there are moments described when Achilles tries to like help him down the stairs or does something, and Priam is just like, fuck you. No, actually, fuck you. And that was, I liked that. It was unexpected, but it felt maybe more real than some of the other descriptions of their interactions.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, if this ends up being like the only adaptation that treats Priam this way, then it could just be the specific way in which he's written here and the relationship is characterized that makes me not like him. So I could go back to, like, after looking at our 10 adaptations, I might be like, actually, for the most part, the consensus is like Priam is not actually this horrible, I don't know. I'm reserving judgment on that one. The way he's treated in this one is quite different, and so it just made me actually want to reevaluate things. Yeah, I'll have to get back to everyone on that after we finish this season off, so I can actually evaluate after we've done 10 adaptations. How do I feel about Priam? It was interesting because he's kind of a character like he's there, but he's always just like the old father who I think every adaptation before though kind of treats him as like he loves his people and his family and he's a family man and this and the other thing. So he couldn't possibly be cruel. The way that we saw him in Fall of the City, right?
Very fatherly, even towards Helen.
Yeah, and his wife was his equal. That's really the big difference, right? Where like this, it's interesting how this book is the closest to Fall of the City, but their primes could not be more different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're really very, very distinct. And actually their Achilles are very different as well.
Yeah, well, that one was the David Gyasi, amazing, like quiet sort of philosopher king type of dude, which I have to say, after all these different iterations of Achilles, I think I prefer him as the sort of like, yes, I know I'm good at my job, I know I'm good at killing and I can do it and not spare a single thought, but I like him when he's like the philosopher king. I don't like it when he's just like, honestly, some adaptations turn him into Jaws, right? Just this mindless eating machine with no personality, just raw. But then you have the philosopher king type, and I'm like, okay, so he will just go and kill and be really unsentimental, but it has to be for a justifiable reason. Like, what is there's
What's
not
the
just
reason there?
exactly. So I think, yeah, I'd be hard pressed to find an Achilles I like more than the David Gyasi version.
Yeah. No, he was excellent.
And I do like it when Achilles isn't arrogant and brash, I'd have to say. Like, David Gyasi just played him so... He was like that quiet anger, the quiet arrogance. Where like, yeah, he's still arrogant and he's a prick and he's annoying as hell. But like, he's quiet because he just knows, and so he doesn't have to like go and you know, be all...
for everyone.
Exactly. So I guess there's levels to being an asshole. There's the quiet one, and then there's the brash one. I think I figured out which one I like better.
What did you think of Briseis' escape attempt?
You know, I thought it was interesting because it, on the one hand, it makes sense that like, even if she was told no, she's just been written sort of as this judgy, rebellious type of person. So I feel like it made sense. And she was like, it's fine. I'll go, and even a month of freedom is better than this horrible rape camp that I'm in, and this, that, and the other thing. And, you know, I thought it was very poignant and powerful how she said, you know, I'd rather go feel like a person for a month.
Yeah.
Even if it's just that, than never again. But also, again, her characterization of, well, what if Priam finds me? He could just dump me, right? Like, a lot of what she did revolved around sort of the reactions of the men, right? So I feel like it was, yes, her trying to make a decision, but also letting the men dictate what she actually did. But I thought it was kind of hilarious how she described herself as, okay, I'm in here, I'm covered, I'm with the body, and then, you know, Achilles is looking at the card. I think I can feel his eyes on my back, even though I'm covered up. And then, you know, lo and behold, it turns out, oh yeah, he knew she was there the whole time, and he was just like, oh, I would have just not stopped you. And she's like, what? You know, so just almost getting scared that like it was kind of adorable, like, oh, I'm gonna pretend I went and hid with the women. And then just pop back up like I was with the woman the whole time. And, and he was just like, okay, cool.
Why did you come back?
So I just thought that was kind of funny. I thought it was an entertaining sequence. With everything else that I was hyper focused on, I don't know personally for me if the escape attempt really added anything beyond just, you know.
I mean, I think it's... I didn't especially understand why she ultimately decided not to go through with it. That wasn't terribly clear for me reading through the book, but I do think that because of how Achilles' change in behavior is described afterwards, it's like she chose to come back, she chose to stay with him, so somehow he's seeing her more as an autonomous individual rather than just this person, or not even person, this thing that he owns. Because she comes back and he's like, why did you come back? And she says, I don't know, which is an appalling answer. But then his response is to ask her to sit and eat with him, which has never happened before. And it's kind of described not as a meeting of equals, but as a meeting of two people with some kind of agency. And I think the escape attempt is, I think that shift is necessitated, or the escape attempt is what facilitates that shift in attitude. But yeah, it was a little odd.
But it's weird because I didn't read it that way, only because it's a book all about the lack of female agency. You don't give them any agency, so I don't understand like why she would suddenly give her that.
See, I think this would have been nice to see developed further, because I can see it being linked to his mummy issues. His mother abandoned him, and we've seen previously in the book that he's kind of mapped his mother onto Briseis. And when given the chance to abandon him, Briseis doesn't take it. She comes back. So if that is what is going on there, and that is what Pat Barker was driving at, it would have been nice to see that made a little bit more explicit. I having said that, I don't know how that could have been made more explicit without having like a snapshot into Achilles' brain. But maybe that's what was going on there. I'm not sure.
You know what, though? This is a bit ridiculous, but again, I had sort of another parallel, another flash. It read to me like Beauty and the fucking Beast, okay? It was like some Stockholm syndrome shit. Because I just,
Especially with her saying, I don't know why I came back. Are you in love with him? Is it what is this?
it's like that one scene. There's two scenes in Beauty and the Beast, and keep in mind, I haven't actually sat down and watched Beauty and the Beast in at least 2-3 years now. Just it's not one of the movies I cycle back through to watch all the way through the way I watch The Lion King religiously like every year. But there's two scenes, and one of them, the first one, is he literally kidnapped her father, and then she wouldn't let he wouldn't let her father go until she was like, I will stay and be the prisoner. So then you have the first, like, okay, she's prisoner, doesn't treat her well, but also he sort of gives her freedom to roam the cat. But then you have she like wanders into the West Wing. He shouts, go away, get out. And then she like flees the castle, runs off into like the woods, gets attacked by the wolves, right? And then he comes and saves her. So then the wolves go away. The beast collapses in the snow, and she's like on the horse, and she's like, okay, I could like leave right now and leave him to his fate because he's terrifying. He's this beastly monster. And then inexplicably, well, it's Disney, so not inexplicably, but in Disney-esque fashion, she's like, I can't just leave him here. He just saved me from a horrible death.
Crisis of conscience. He saved me from the death that I would not have experienced had he not kidnapped my father.
Exactly. Right. And had he not yelled at me for trespassing into his West Wing. So, but then she takes him back to the castle, and then the very next scene is her treating his wound and being like, thank you for saving my life. And he's just like, So that scene came to mind as a parallel, and I was like, oh my God, it's like saving him, and then it's kind of also like, yeah, after she falls in love with Beast, quote unquote, and then she comes to warn him about the villagers storming the castle, and he's like, why did you? He's like, you came back? And she's like, of course I did. And I'm like, well, that wasn't really a given. I mean, this weren't Disney, but I'm like, honey, you have like the strongest fucking syndrome, like Stockholm syndrome. So I just was seeing, like, to me, I read it as, no, Briseis just has some strong ass Stockholm syndrome because she knows it's a brutal life, and she's criticizing all these other people, but also she's Achilles' prize. And so because he's terrible, but he's not terrible in the way that other people are being terrible, I would rather go back.
At least he's not Agamemnon.
Right. Like, she was like, I would rather just go back to him because, well, it could be worse. And that to me is not acceptable. But it had to be because there was no other, like, that's what happened.
Right, because she doesn't leave.
So I don't know if it was agency or if it was just, I could actually end up in a worse situation. Because that's the thing. Like, yes, you have her internal dialogue, right? Priam could leave me on the road. I could be captured. Or if I did make it, and then the city falls, and because she says many times, like, oh, well, she's not one to like throw herself off the parapets and nobly kill herself, so knowing that she probably would have then just been captured again, she could have gone to someone who wasn't Achilles, right? And it could be much worse. So I think it's almost part of like, she literally goes back again out of fear of like men's decisions or so I don't, I think it's interesting, and it could be a reason giving her some agency. That's just not the way I read that. Yeah, it would be interesting to ask Pat Barker, because I just don't like overall, like, I never lost sight of what she's going for, the work as a whole, but there were like just here and there things that popped up that I'm like, okay, that doesn't really make sense, and I would like to know why this was a decision. And I kind of am wondering if it has something to do even with Pat Barker coming in and writing it. I don't believe she's a trained classicist. I think she's just a novelist who, right. So she's a novelist who has an appreciation for the ancient world. And I very much encourage all people. You don't have to be, exactly. Like, you don't have to be a classicist, but, in comparing to some other sort of contemporary writers who are her peers, we just read Madeline Miller's Song of Achilles. I want to say that there are some novelists who just maybe have a bit better grasp of the ancient world, or at least some of the dynamics, while like I just feel like this is very much one of these novels that's supposed to be harrowing. You're trying to you know, show this message, but also at the same time, it to me it read as it's supposed to be very visual. Like to me, I think like it could almost be its own character, is her description of visuals and setting in a way that is not paid attention to in some other things.
Yeah.
I
think
and that's fine.
It'll be interesting to read Women of Troy, to see if there are the same kinds of little quibbles with that one.
Yeah, I mean, this could also just be the fact. I mean, this is, I think, what Pat Barker's like 14th novel or something. So I say all this and analyze this book knowing I have not read any of her other works yet, so I cannot judge whether this is like characteristic of her writing style, or if this is like unique to this one novel she wanted to write. But I would find it quite interesting to see what else, and to see whether it ends up becoming a larger trend. But I mean, overall, like her depiction of how it's like for women is harrowing, but it's important, an important angle, since not a lot of people would take it on. And I did want to point to one thing that really sort of hit home as well, was her description of after Patroclus dies, and Briseis' friend Ismene she's basically treated as Patroclus's widow, kind of, even though she was his war prize. She was treated kind of as his widow right up until the moment that she was herself given away as a prize. And so that was harrowing to hear how she was sort of in the women's tents and doing the thing. And then when you have this very harrowing scene of the men come in and just say, and yeah, here's your prize. And then he's like, Diomedes wins her, like sizes her up and is like, yeah, she'll do. And like takes her away.
Yeah.
So you're like,
One thing I did appreciate about this book was, I think Pat Barker captured very well the utter disregard that the men, particularly the Greek men, but I mean Priam as well a little bit, have for the women as people. The idea that any of the women are grieving anything that's happened, the idea that Briseis is like grieving the loss of her brothers and her entire family, is just not even present in the minds of the men, and that is made very, very clear. And I think it highlights their status as possessions and objects as opposed to people very, very well. I found that actually quite difficult to read sections of it, because you have the grief told by Briseis, and you empathize with what she's going through, and to a certain extent you feel what she's going through, and then just abruptly she's kind of torn out of her internal monologue of grief, and just a man appears and does something to her, and it's like they don't know or don't care that actually she has thoughts and feelings and emotions, because they're completely irrelevant. It was a very well done juxtaposition, I think, and very, I think captured very well what it may have been like to be a slave taken in wartime, or I mean really any kind of slave, but specifically in war.
I agree. It was very well done. I also kind of in that vein, I think what was interesting for me to read as well was when Briseis wants to go take care of Priam when he's sneaked into the camp. And she's about to go get him the water to wash in the morning and insists on taking care of him. And then you have, Achilles' men being like, no, we can do that.
Yeah.
And then when you have her say, no, because my like sister's whatever was married to
My sister is his daughter-in-law. Yeah, like this is someone I have a familial connection to.
Like their immediate response was like shock. Like they forgot
Mm-hmm.
that she even had a past outside of being a slave, right? And that kind of goes with this erasure of once you're a slave, everything about you personally, especially your history,
Mm-hmm.
goes away. So I mean, it's like, yeah, they knew she was a Trojan, but I'm like, knowing she's a Trojan should connotate that she has connections to Troy and obviously would have a family. And so the fact that their reaction was like so shocked, like what? That also erases her past.
I think that really nicely parallels what Nesta told her at the beginning of the novel when she was first brought to the Greek camp. You have to forget everything that came before this because it will only make you miserable. And she doesn't, very obviously the whole time. She knows who she is. But his advice and this episode right at the end really neatly bookend the book and show that it doesn't matter if she's remembered who she is. No one else has. They don't care. She's just Briseis. She's the one that brings them wine and that they fetch for Achilles at nighttime. Beyond that, it really, really, who cares? And the fact that actually she is related to the king of the country, the city that they're currently attacking, is like mind-blowing for them.
Yeah. I mean, and actually that segues perfectly into, I want to know what you thought of kind of Briseis's final soliloquy right at the end.
I don't know. Which is a really unsatisfying answer. I know. I'm not sure. What were your thoughts?
Again, thinking so much about how this was written in the post-Me Too movement, because she says in that final soliloquy, she kind of recaps the themes of everything, but then she does have this thing about, she reminds the reader, the audience, that, ancient armies were rape camps and that they were a horrible place to be, and that, no one and then she has that whole part about how she is just a piece who will fit into Achilles' story, and that she is not going to get her own, and she does this reflective thing on how she's like, yes, people will remember me only as the prize or only as this, and how she's undeserving of her own story. And so she, it kind of wraps everything, tries to wrap it in a sort of bow where it's like, please remember that there were women and there were things that happened to them. But I'm kind of like considering the fact that it was written in the post-Me Too movement, and there's clearly right now we're living in a time where novelizations and feminist retellings of the same source material are very popular. I don't really know what the ending soliloquy added, and for me, I don't think it hit as hard as I believe she wanted it to hit people. I mean, if you're going to end your book with that, you want it to be a powerful thing that resonates. And I'm kind of like, well, in this era when women know what they're getting into, I already know from a 21st century feminist woman, like, I know these horrible places were quite terrible. Like this ain't no walk in the park, right? So I thought it was a bit excessive. I'm kind of like, yeah, I know it's a rape camp. Why are you telling me? So I think, as unsatisfyingly as you also felt, it didn't land. It was just sort of like okay, so we're going to go back through your top 5 hits of what's horrible about the situation, but it's also just telling me everything that I would be.
Know, yeah.
Right, so I'm kind of like, I just don't see what the point. I mean, you might as well just end it with them going home or something. I guess maybe I have the benefit, but also then, unfortunately for poor Pat Barker, having read, 1,000 Ships and seeing how powerfully Natalie ends with Andromache's story. That's not happy either, but it's like an acceptance of, okay, there's all this horrible shit, but you know what? She learned to like make do with the situation and keep going, right? And like find some measure of happiness in the horrible. So it's not just this punching down of this sucks, on and on and on, and it's all just terrible. So I guess if I'm doing a direct comparison with like Natalie Haynes' work, I love the ending of her novel, and even beyond just the drama, you have Calliope
Yeah.
coming in with a little blurb, which ties it up to finish it. So yeah, I was a little let down by how I kind of felt that the ending soliloquy, while I know or I think I know what she was going for, it just didn't hit, and I felt kind of bad about that. So based on your response of just, I'm a bit confused.
Like, maybe apathetic would be. But the thing
Yeah.
is, like, I don't have a better suggestion, because Thousand Ships, there are moments of lightness and there are moments of respite. So ending with Andromache having a measure of peace isn't jarring. I feel like Briseis having a similar ending may have felt a little bit out of place, because it's unrelentingly bad. Yeah.
They don't even need to do that. She could have just copied Fall of a City's ending.
And just,
I mean, remember,
ended.
Fall of a City, you had a Synax thrown off,
Yeah.
you had Andromache cursing him, and then you had, okay, let's go home. So you see them like board the ship and look toward a storm, and then it pans out. They don't even say it, just pans out into darkness. So I'm kind of like, she's pregnant, she's going home, she's done the thing where she made sure people were buried who needed to be buried. You could have just been like, had her new husband been like, okay, we're going home, and had her been like, okay, and now we are sailing off to an unknown fate in Greece. Like, I normally, I guess, I know I don't like sort of abrupt sort of end, it just ends. But this one, I felt it was written kind of into a corner in a way where I'm like, it might have been fine to
just end it.
Because I feel like she was kind of trying to do what like Song of Achilles did, which is sort of give it sort of like a ending, right, where it says something, how Song of Achilles was like, okay, well, and Thetis did one nice thing, and then he goes off into whatever. I just I think you could have picked 2 or 3 different ending styles, whether it's sort of an abrupt end, they leave for Greece, but or like a sort of epilogue-y type of whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like there were more ways than just trying to hammer home it just felt like at the ending of an essay, right? Like she's basically summarizing her entire thesis statement. Maybe that's also because I'm in thesis writing mode, but it just feels like you're trying to wrap your points in a bow and have it hit in this big old soliloquy of, don't forget, this is terrible.
Yeah.
But it's just, I didn't find that it was needed. So maybe that's just it.
No,
yeah.
I get that. I do get that.
So that was just kind of, and then my final sort of parting thought when I was finishing the book was also just found it was interesting how Pat Barker decided to have Achilles' son Pyrrhus, not Neoptolemus, Pyrrhus, come in and do the thing, and having read what was it in? Yeah, it was Song of Achilles, right? That it was Neoptolemus who was the little shit, the little twat at the end. So, yeah, it was just interesting. Small difference doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but I just thought it was interesting how because they're like the same character. It's just Neoptolemus did certain bad things in Song of Achilles, and then Pyrrhus did other gross things here. So, same person. It doesn't really add or subtract anything. But yeah, I just, that was kind of another
interesting
thought at the end of I was like, okay, that's kind of random, but okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know. Any final thoughts overall?
Well, I think we've both found things in this that either we didn't understand or wanted more, like, elaborating more. I do think it was a very well written book. I did enjoy reading it. I will again say, for people considering reading it themselves, it is unrelentingly sad. It's a tragedy, and I don't think there is any other way to tell that particular story. I think Pat Barker did a fantastic job. I did enjoy very much the characterizations of Briseis and Achilles and not Agamemnon. He was just unpleasant. But I did enjoy it for all that there were bits I would have liked to be different. It was a good book. And again, different to everything we've looked at before.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, part of the reason we're doing this podcast is to really do some deep dives into the material and the sort of the motivation. So I know it sounds like we've just kind of been going at it for an hour and this was bad and this didn't hit and this was weird, but that's kind of, we just wanted to really talk about it. But if I'm going for the more superficial, what did I just think overall? It was an enjoyable listen. And I will say that actually, unlike the other audiobooks, this one was read by two authors. We had Briseis' part by a lovely British woman with a very sort of soft, silky, very relaxing voice that, okay, honestly, I would describe her voice as fucking sexy as hell. So that was a bit weird to have this like sexy woman voice reading this horrible stuff, but it was a enjoyable listen. And then when when it did sort of shift to sort of Achilles, we had a man basically read it, and he also had a very, very nice sexy voice. So that kind of also affected how I yeah, so I was like, your voice does not sound like Cruel Achilles. Your voice is yummy. But I would say if you were considering reading it, I always encourage physically reading books, yay reading. But also if you are someone who might not want to like sit there and physically read the harrowing details, I would recommend the audiobook because it is a very enjoyable listen despite the material. I really, really appreciated it. And then the having the two different narrators really emphasize when the perspective changed and when it didn't, and it sort of gave it a bit of a different flavor. So yeah, overall I really liked it. Very different, unlike anything. But I'm glad I read it. Yeah, I'm and you know what? I will admit it might have hit very differently if this was written before the Me Too era. Maybe the soliloquy at the end might have hit a bit harder. So yeah, just I would say I keep in mind the time period in which it was written, 2018. So but yeah, it was good, and it makes me excited for future works, both by Pat Barker and just generally. I really, really thought maybe at this point I would be really, really tired of hearing another
just sick of the
Iliad, but I'm still enjoying it. Although I feel like we're getting darker and darker.
We do seem to be.
Like,
we do seem to be. I'm kind of waiting for my comedy. I don't think we're going to get it, given that this is the Iliad.
I'll just watch the Brad Pitt movie because you know what? At least that's freaking entertaining as hell.
This is true.
Because I can just spend half the time insulting freaking Orlando Bloom's,
Paris, just yelling insults at the screen.
Princeling. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Well, I'm excited for what we do next, and yeah. I mean, I would just say if you guys have a different take on this book, or if you want to quickly read it and then email us, please do, because I know we've been really talking about some serious themes here and not really sure. But if anyone else has thoughts on this novel, please let us know. We would love to hear what you have to say about it as well. So
absolutely.
Yeah. And with that, I would say we will see you guys next week. Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review, and you can also follow us on social media at The Reading Party Podcast. If you'd like to leave us a book or movie suggestion, then email us at thereadingpartypod@gmail.com. See you next week.